Welcome to NewsNation's Backscroll, where we look back at our major news coverage on the most important topics and personalities of our time.
Travel industry could also be disrupted. International travel to the United States is expected to slide by 5% this year, contributing to a $64 billion shortfall for the industry. Here with the latest on what you need to know before you book a trip is NewsNation travel editor Peter Greenberg. Peter, hello. Where in the world are you today? I love asking you that question.
This is an easy one. I'm in Miami.
Okay, this is the closest I think I've ever interviewed you. You're usually, globetrotting. It's lovely. So you've said 2025 was expected to be a big year for Americans traveling overseas when it comes to booking international. How do you expect tariffs to now impact the pricing?
Well, it already has. You look at that 5% average for downfall for foreign travel to the U.S. It's actually bigger than that right now. Over the last 6 weeks, foreign travel to the U.S. has dropped about 24%. That's an average. Canadian travel to the U.S., it's about 5 weeks ago, it was 40% down. As of last Friday, just 2 days ago, down 75%. So what that means, a lot of empty seats coming into the U.S., which means a lot of empty seats going back out. So we're seeing airfares tumble on international flights. We're seeing fares so low. There was a fare the other day from San Francisco to Cairo for $437.
Wow.
From Los Angeles to Sydney, get ready for this, round trip, $396. You can't get from New York to Chicago for $396,
No.
which means there's going to be a trade-off there as well. Domestic airfares will probably go up as more and more Americans are worried about the situation and may decide to stay home, despite the fact that the international fares are dropping.
So international fares might drop, domestic flights may go up, good to know. And with tariffs expected to drive up prices on flights, should travelers be thinking about booking right now?
Well, there's one little silver lining here. With all those empty seats, for the first time maybe since COVID, you're going to see a lot of available frequent flyer award seats for people who could not have never redeemed them before because the airlines have this excess capacity and they're going to try to burn that off. So check out your frequent flyer accounts now for those people who've had such a tough time redeeming their awards. Over the next 2 weeks to 4 weeks, you might see some great bargains there, not to mention availability.
All right, love that. Does that go for hotels as well? Should people be thinking about the future? How far out should we be booking our hotels? Peter, can you hear me?
Well, yes, everything's connected. You have to look at how you connect the dots between airlines, hotels, restaurants, staffing. It all gets connected. And so you will see a drop off apparently. And of course, the law of supply and demand jumps in. And that's what you have to be ready to jump on.
New data shows there's been a steady decline of foreign travelers coming into the United States, with more than 18% fewer passing through customs compared to last year. Why is that, and do we expect that number to grow this year?
That's right. So it's all connected. You need to move quickly because remember, the travel industry is very resilient. The airlines will not just adjust their flights, they'll adjust the kinds of planes they're using to reduce the capacity in those flights. And once they come up with some smaller flights on those routes, you're going to see higher airfares.
Delta stock price, like many other companies this week, it took a major hit. Why were airlines specifically feeling the effects of tariffs, and how are they responding now?
Well, they're feeling the effects because the number of seats just dropped out of them. Each airline in the United States has basically adjusted their quarterly earnings by half. They've cut it in half. One airline, Virgin Atlantic, reported their first profit since 2016, but in that announcement they said, oh, by the way, it ain't going to happen in 2025. They're already girding for a drop-off that's going to stay for the rest of the year.
I do want to ask you about cruises, too. Americans love their cruises. Even Royal Caribbean is falling victim to the recent bear market. How do you see the travel industry now moving forward after these global tariffs?
Well, I'm actually in Miami right now to attend the global summit of the cruise industry, which starts tomorrow. And it's interesting to note that 4 weeks ago, they were very excited because what? They'd already sold 80% of their inventory for 2025 by February. That's 2 months ago. Now it's all about forward-looking projections and forward bookings, and Americans are sort of withdrawing right now. They're holding back on all levels of travel, whether it's cruise ships or luxury travel, because of the gyrations of the stock market. So right now, everything's basically flattened out, and they're a little bit worried about that.
New tariffs on Canada, Mexico, China set to take effect Tuesday. President Trump leveling that 25% tax on those countries. All three countries actually responding, saying that they will retaliate. I know China is getting an extra 10% tax. Joining me right now to discuss, we've got Democratic strategist Jonathan Harris and Republican strategist Matt Klink. Thank you both. I want to spare the audience some spin here and keep our time economic here. Because obviously this tariff discussion has been much talked about. I mean, the administration is saying that this is indeed to help stop the flow of fentanyl into the country, among other things regarding our border. Matt, let's just play what if, tariffs end up raising prices for all of us across the board, but we have fewer overdose deaths of young people in this country. Will the economic plan that President Trump has in play backfire?
Adrian, the simple answer is that it depends. I mean, look, right now that if the numbers are shocking, that fentanyl is the #1 killer of men ages 18 to 40 right now. So, and I think what you heard Secretary Noam say at the border today, that, you know, the crime and dangerous drugs flowing across the border, primarily from Mexico, but to a lesser extent from Canada, nevertheless, necessitated this. The tariffs go into effect on Tuesday, and it could, I underscore could, have the potential to increase the cost of certain things. If the gain is better than the near-term price increase, or if Canada and Mexico come to the table and are serious about stopping the flow of crime and drugs flowing across the border, I think that everybody will ultimately end up winning. We've said all along that Trump's tariffs are a tactic to get people to negotiate because the status quo is not working.
Jonathan, if this terror plan were to work and America becomes stronger in negotiating with our allies as well as our enemies, and lower the price of eggs, because we've heard that a lot this past couple of weeks, will we see more bipartisanship among at least moderate Democrats and Republicans?
I mean, that's a pretty big if. One of the things I said years ago when I was covering these topics is the International Monetary Fund said before COVID that we were headed for a recession. And the primary reason that they cited for the recession was Trump's trade war with China, these silly tariffs and the trade war that he started and then lost with China. And so if past is prologue, it's not going to work. It's going to, I mean, Donald Trump himself said recently, I think yesterday or today, that there should be some pain expected. And for the people that voted for him and actually believed him, which is stunning to me that anyone would, but that actually believed him, that he cared about the middle class and cared about lowering the price of groceries, I don't think that he campaigned on causing people pain. But that's what he's saying now by doing these completely voluntary tariffs that crashed our economy into a recession the last time he did it. So to answer your question, I don't know that they will work. If they do work, I think it'll be strongly based on the response of the constituencies of our people in office, because if their constituencies are furious that they're having even more, you know, the price of eggs is at a record high in groceries. If Donald Trump makes that worse, bipartisanship, if their constituencies are upset, is probably not on the table.
Matt, real quick question.
The price of eggs has, the price of eggs has zero to do with Donald Trump. It's the Department of Agriculture killing 100 million chickens because of concerns over bird flu before Trump took office. No chickens, no eggs. So that's
what comes first, the chicken or the eggs? Let me get to this because there are facts there, but let's get Matt, one more question in. Federal employees are being offered deferred resignation if they don't want to comply with this elimination of work from home. Staffers have until Thursday to decide if they'll resign in September. They're going to be paid every biweekly paycheck like normal. They're just off the books until September. 200,000 people, Matt, could take this deal. What are your thoughts?
That is a win for the country. Right now, about 6% of the federal workforce shows up for work on a daily basis. That is not tolerable. It's not sustainable. Either show up to the office or quit, or ultimately be fired. I think it's a great plan. The public overwhelmingly supports the downsizing of government. And again, Trump's changing the status quo and trying to shake up Washington, D.C. because D.C. government is broken.
Joining me now is Tom Maioli, who owns several car dealerships
in New Jersey. Tom, thank you so much for giving us some of your time. All right,
Thanks for having me on.
These new tariffs have now gone into effect. You own 6 dealerships. How are these new tariffs directly going to impact your business?
It's going to impact it big. Listen, the consumer's already trying to recover from pre-COVID inflation. The Fed's been keeping interest rates high to keep inflation down. And the consumers, payments have gone from, $800 a month to $1,200 a month. And, consumers are, instead of buying new cars, they're repairing their cars. But the cost of repairs are going to go up. All parts come from all China, Japan, Mexico, Canada. And it's just going to cost the consumer more money. So we're going to drive inflation up. And, at the same time, I understand, listen, President Trump's a smart guy and he's got a plan. And his plan is to try and drive manufacturing back to the U.S. But, to build these plants, is 3 years. And not only that, you're going to drive the cost up that it's going to cost to build these plants because all steel, materials, wood, et cetera, it's all going to have increased pricing. And I'm not so sure how the consumer sustains this because look at, things like eggs and food and gasoline and, other costs that the consumer is just absorbing. And I think they're at the end of the rope. They're paying 7-8% interest rates on cars, houses, and there's not much room until the rubber band breaks.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a little nest egg, it maybe is uncomfortable. You may not like it, but you can probably deal with it. But if you don't really have reserves, this can certainly be tough. So Tom, you mentioned the fact that new plants, which we know that's what the president's trying to do. He's trying to create new jobs, new factories. But you're saying that these new plants could take 3 years. How soon do you think customers, when it comes to looking for a vehicle, will feel this pinch?
I think you're talking 30 days. I mean, it's going to hit the supply chain immediately. And, listen, you can't stop transportation. People have to drive. They have to get their children to school and they have to get to work. But, it's going to be devastating for the consumer because, again, they have been stretched from COVID and they have not been able to recover. The Fed's been trying to push down inflation. And, what this does also is this pushes the manufacturers to a point where they can't increase their supply. And the only way really to get inflation down is increased supply. You can bring interest rates up to 20%, but there's going to be a baseline demand that exists. And, I think the Fed's done everything they could possibly do to bring that demand down, but there is no supply. So if we're going to increase the cost on parts, the manufacturers have no choice but to increase their price to the consumer. They're going to pull back on manufacturing, and it's going to decrease the supply. So I think it's a double whammy, and I think we need to be very careful about what's going on here. And I think the president's smart. He's very good at creating these situations to get people to the table. But I think ultimately he'll work a deal out.
All right, so let's talk about possible plus sides here, Tom. What are your thoughts on Honda announcing that it will be producing its next Civic in the state of Indiana, as opposed to the country of Mexico, specifically in response to this? So, I mean, is that kind of a bright side to all of this?
Yeah, listen, it's a bright side. It's going to bring jobs back to the U.S. and manufacturing back to the U.S. But again, that's a 3-year cycle. And that's only one of their models. So I think what they're doing is they're putting their toe in the water. They're showing the president that we're going to work with you. But they're still keeping the rest of their manufacturing outside of the U.S. because it's not cost effective in the U.S. You can build all these plants that you want. But, our labor force is not in place. It's been deteriorated through technology and, and life cycles of manufacturing being eroded in the U.S. And all that's gone overseas. So to rebuild a manufacturing labor force in the U.S. is going to take years, and it's not cost effective.
All right, going to take years. Last question for you, Tom. What do you think happens next? And if somebody is watching this right now, they are in the market for, a new car, a different car. With these tariffs in effect right now, would you recommend that people go with a new vehicle, or should they be looking for something that is pre-owned?
Well, listen, this is going to send pre-owned vehicles skyrocketing because, the pre-owned vehicles come from people who sell their cars or trade their cars to get new cars. And if the price goes up enough, which I think it's going to, and they're not going to buy the new car, the price of used cars is going to skyrocket because there's going to be less supply. If you're in the market for a car, I recommend you go buy it now before these tariffs get out of control.
All right, you heard it right there. Tom Maioli, who owns several car dealerships in the state of New Jersey. Tom, thank you so much. But in the meantime, there's some news developing by the hour when it comes to President Trump's tariffs, as America's biggest industries are responding, as well as the stock markets. Here's a look at where things stand right now. You can see it is red across the board. And it comes as President Trump takes to Truth Social to say he has agreed that Mexico will not be required to pay tariffs on anything that falls under their agreement until April 2nd. But as all of this develops, truckers are bracing for major changes with no clear roadmap. The American Trucking Association warning the Trump administration of unintended consequences. So let's bring in NewsNation's Nancy Liu, who is live for us at the Port of Los Angeles. So Nancy, what are you hearing from truckers?
Well, Nicole, there's a lot of anxiety throughout the supply chain in which truckers are key in getting all consumer items to your door. Of course, there's a new reprieve from Mexico, but now that tariffs have kicked in for Canada, word of trucks at the border turning around to avoid that new 25% payment at customs.
Told us to hold off, wait, don't send the customs clearance through. Just that definitely did happen.
Okay. Does that make you worry that that's going to spread?
It does. Just no matter what, there's a lot of anxiety about what the next day will bring.
Greg Dubuque is a third-generation trucker, and like many others in the industry, he is worried and anxious over an uncertain future. But things continue to roll at Liberty West Trucking, which has been transporting goods between the U.S. and Canada for decades. Clothing, produce, and all kinds of items were already on the move before the tariffs kicked in. So companies are beginning to pay up in order to keep business projects and perishable products in the pipeline. Nearly half of all U.S. imports come from Mexico, Canada, and China. In the short term, unwinding the process would be costlier than paying the new U.S. tariffs. For nearly 3 million American truckers, major concern over the long term.
We need to keep our wheels rolling, that's for sure, and rolling with good customer freight that pays the bills. And if that's not there, that would really hurt our industry in the short term.
How painful is just one day?
One day to us with 40 trucks, we're somewhere around the neighborhood of $50,000. If the fleet was to stop in one day, that's what the cost would be. You're looking at an average cost of $1,200 a day for a truck.
Now, truckers expect demand to dip in the months ahead if the tariffs stick and there is no new trade agreements. According to one estimate, that 25% tax could increase U.S. revenue by more than $100 billion a year.
All right, so this is constantly evolving, Nancy. Are truckers encouraged by this new month-long exemption?
Definitely. There's major relief over that. But it's only 1 month when it comes to American automakers. And of course, the automakers are expected to plot and plan for more manufacturing within our borders. But that obviously is not going to happen fast. So the fear is lower demand for trucking those goods after next month. For Liberty West Trucking and many other companies, containers with car parts are crisscrossing into Mexico and Canada multiple times a day. American truckers, of course, a key voting bloc for President Trump last year, so hope is really hinging on that support.
Joining me now is Ryan Peterson. He is the CEO of Flexport, a supply chain logistics platform. When I tell you there was one person I wanted to hear from on this, it is the man on your screen, Ryan Peterson. Thanks for being back with us, Ryan. If we have to break away, I know you understand, but tell me what you're seeing tonight as it relates to China, these tariffs, and how businesses are reacting.
Yeah, great. Obviously, I understand we got to hear from the president if he comes out and speaks. Yeah. So what we saw last night at midnight Eastern time was that you had a 10% increase in duties on goods coming from China. That's a big deal. That's on top of all the other duties that have been layered onto those goods over the previous years. But maybe an even bigger deal was the elimination of what's called the de minimis exemption.
Yeah. Explain that.
Yeah, that says that goods that are less than $800 in value, if they're shipped to an end consumer, that's me and you, then there's no duty at all that's paid. And that's been the law of the land for a long time. And that's now going away if the goods are made in China. And that's a huge percentage of goods flows these days for consumer goods. You have major Chinese e-commerce brands that have become sort of titans of the world of e-commerce in the last few years. But also lots of smaller businesses are using this exemption to ship goods out of Mexico. They're made in China, but they ship them to Mexico by ocean freight and then ship them one at a time and avoid duties. So they've eliminated that, at least for goods from China. So it's a really big deal in the supply chain world.
I don't want to name specific companies, obviously, because the world is a really big place. But is this the Amazons, the Etsy's, when you buy things that are shipped in from China for $25, $50, $100, whatever it is, under 800, the cost on those items could potentially start going up?
Amazon does have a big offering doing this. It's Temu and Shein are and TikTok as well, TikTok shops. Etsy, I don't think so. I think Etsy's much more, hopefully made by your grandma and stuff like that. But yeah, those other ones for sure.
When does the impact here, first off, let me ask you this. From the companies that you deal with, how are they changing operations, if at all? And for the person who's sitting here watching this tonight, when do they start to feel the trickle-down effects from all this?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing here was how fast it hit. I mean, this executive order just came out a couple of days ago and implemented today. In the past, when the Trump administration and the Biden administration, when they've done new duties on China, they usually gave at least 1 month's notice. So that's pretty short frame for the government itself to be able to get their systems up and working. All reports out of CBP today are that the systems are working as planned, that they are now no longer allowing de minimis to clear. What you've seen is a lot of companies move this was not like totally unforeseen.
Right, Trump had been talking about it out on the campaign trail for months.
Yeah, and the new duties from China, everyone's seen it coming. I don't think it's the end of it either, by the way. The Treasury Secretary has until April 1st to put in a formal recommendation and a report for Trump, for the president on China trade. So I would expect more ratcheting up of barriers to trade there. What brands are doing in response? Some of them are pulling in goods early. You're going to see more and more if you can get goods in before the duties hit. You'll see a scramble to do that. They're also going to start to relocate fulfillment centers into the United States. If you can no longer flow the goods in from overseas, you're going to want to position that inventory closer to customers so you can get faster shipping times, a better customer experience. So you'll see those jobs start to come back to the United States, and that is as it's designed.
I was looking at the cost to fly goods from Europe to North America, and it's up a handful of %. And I guess that's probably part of the front running that you talked about, because the president has talked about possible European tariffs on the EU. What happens if the president goes down that route?
Yeah, I mean, and we saw it with Canada and Mexico that, if those are our two biggest trading partners and right here in the North American continent, and if those two are up for potential tariffs, then I don't think anybody feels like they're safe and they won't see tariffs. Trump did say last week in a sort of off-the-cuff statement that he expects to put tariffs on the EU too. So I think brands should just expect that might be the new normal. It is hard to run a supply chain in a world where you can't really plan for these things. And so the name of the game right now is agility. It's watching the news constantly, paying attention to statements out of the White House, out of the various regulatory agencies, and being ready for whatever might happen. It's going to be the winner in all of this is going to be whoever's nimble. You can't outrun the bear, but you can outrun your slowest friend. And I think that's going to be kind of the name of the game. If you can be faster than your competitor to respond to these things, you may be able to create competitive advantage for yourself.
What we're going to be doing is a 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States. If they're made in the United States, there's absolutely no tariff.
President Trump there announcing sweeping auto tariffs with a 25% tax on automobiles as well as car parts imported into the United States. The president says these tariffs, set to go into effect on April 2nd, are permanent. It's a permanent tool to push automakers to build plants and produce cars domestically. And the president's tariff war threats go even further. I want to now bring in Peter Dunn, CEO of Your Money Line and host of the Pete the Planner Show. Always good to see you, Peter. Thanks for hopping on. 25% tax on cars. I think the average person at home just wants to know, hey, what does this mean for me and my family trying to buy a car right now?
I was asking myself that same question as I'm trying to buy a car for my 16-year-old daughter. Okay, because
Oh,
this is
happy birthday. That's a big one for her. Yeah.
yeah. Well, never mind the insurance rates, but this is where this gets confusing. Cars.com every year puts out the top 10 most American cars that you can buy in terms of where they're manufactured and where the parts are manufactured. This may or may not surprise you. 3 of the top 10 are Teslas. Okay. But then it's all Hondas, Toyotas, and Volkswagens. And the only American car on the list is a Jeep Gladiator. So when people try to, so when people try to understand what this means, it's like, oh, good for GM and good for Ford. No, not at all. In fact, their stocks dove overnight.
So, okay, so companies like Ford and Chevy are not expecting their sales to go gangbusters after this announcement?
No, because we're in a globalized economy where their parts are manufactured in Canada and Mexico, because that's the way it used to be. That was okay. That was part of trade agreements, and those trade agreements are now being looked at a little differently. Canada is, again, not happy with the news from yesterday. And German manufacturers are quite upset, and they think it'll throw the car business globally into unrest.
Yeah. Let me share this with you, Peter. According to the U.S. International Trade Commission, sweeping auto tariffs would reduce imports by 74%. Obviously a huge drop. So if that happens, will the United States even be able to close the gap with American-made vehicles?
If it goes that way, probably not. But I think it's the start and stop nature of all of this, which is confusing, right? The deadline on this is April 2nd. It's supposed to be a permanent tariff that brings in $100 billion, fantastic, to the economy. But what that is it's a tax on the corporations. And as you know, corporations aren't going to eat that. They're going to pass the cost on to consumers. So there's a lot to be. I don't like to be cynical. I really don't. But I do look at this top 10 list and go, okay, where's my grandpa worked at GM? Where's GM? It's not on the list. I'm kind of freaking out a little bit.
Yeah. You bring up April 2nd, which is when these tariffs are set to go into effect. The same day, the Trump administration says it'll unveil reciprocal tariffs on a slew of other imports. Pete, what are you tracking ahead of next Wednesday, and any expectations of what else might be rolled out?
Feels a bit like a March Madness bracket. You know, you're just saying, like, where are the tariffs coming in? I'll tell you, next Tuesday, Wednesday is going to be kind of wild. Not a prediction guy. Markets could be unsettled, which is the kindest way I can say that on a morning television show.
Yeah.
Clock is ticking on the new tariff deadlines set up by President Trump. After a week of on and then off again tariffs threatened on Mexico and Canada, businesses from Wall Street to Main Street are not sure what will happen next. On Friday, President Trump suggested more last-minute changes to the U.S. trade policy could be on the way.
There'll always be changes and adjustments, and you can't just. I could have, for instance, told the American car companies, "No, I'm not going to give you anything," and then you wouldn't have had to say, "Well, they're getting a little extra." It's just a little bit of a 1-month reprieve. They're very happy about what's happening. They won't have to go across borders, and you see the zigzagging. You have a fender made in Canada, you have something else made in Mexico. We don't want that. We want it made here.
Here with us now, small business owner Randy Carr, CEO of World Emblem. His company manufactures emblems and patches around the world, including right here in the United States. Good morning, Randy.
Morning, how are you?
Great, thank you. So you mentioned, like I mentioned, you make emblems for all kinds of clothing and sports gear. How concerned are you about your customers being able to continue to get their supply, not only here in the U.S., but around the world?
Well, I think the real issue here is there's a couple different things at play. I mean, the first thing is we manufacture in the States and we manufacture in Mexico. A lot of the business right now is built upon this kind of Mexico, U.S., Canada being one global trading partner. And the last 30 years has been proven that the cost associated with making these products comes from all 3 countries. We buy merchandise in the States, we ship it to Mexico, we convert it, we ship it back to the U.S., or we ship it to Canada, and the cost baked into that manufacturing process is all part of that ecosystem.
So you have over 1 million square footage of factory space in North America and Europe. Break this down for me, Randy. If there is a 20% tariff in Mexico, again, where your company hires workers, are you going to raise prices?
Yeah. So there's 2 things at play here, and we've been sort of looking at this since October of last year. I think the big issue here is the inconsistency of the policies. So the easy answer is yes, we are going to raise prices, but we're going to eat half of that. So we've elected to take 50% of whatever tariffs come across and take it out of our overhead or our distributions to shareholders. And the other half will do our very best not to raise prices, but unfortunately, we're going to have to in order to remain profitable.
50% is a huge margin. Is it sustainable? How concerned are you about keeping your business viable in this current climate?
Look, we'll always be sustainable. A friend of mine said you overweight the current state. So I think the current worldview right now is we can do it. What's going to happen though is it's going to come out of CapEx. It's going to come out of deep investments into either generative AI or creating what we would call a dark plant in the US. So even if we were to reshore, looking at reshoring would take years to do, and it would have to be done with a great deal of automation in order to offset what is already an acceptable price to the end user or our clients. We certainly can't just pick up 800 jobs from Mexico, drop them in the US, and pay those same exact rates that we would pay in the US for the same work we're paying for in Mexico. So we would have to triple our prices, in which case that would be unsustainable to the end user.
What kind of conversations are you having with your clients and your employees who depend on you and are seeing all this play out?
All right, so there's two different conversations. The first one is, let's talk about the clients. Every one of our clients have been unbelievably cooperative, receptive, and understanding. The majority of them are in the same situation we are. When you talk about the three largest trading partners in the world, which is Mexico, Canada, and the US, Mexico, Canada, and China, the vast majority of our clients are sort of dealing with that same scenario, whether it's from us or somebody else. Now with our employees, it's a whole different issue because we are having conversations with the Dominican Republic and looking at creating that hedge for what we're doing in Mexico in a different country to offset not only tariffs, however, inflation that's happening in Mexico from nearshoring from China from back in the 2018 Trump tariffs.
From the Consumer Brands Association. So what about that? Let's talk about that first. So, we have a lot of concern about tariffs. We saw it in today's stock trading, especially after the president's comments with about an hour to go in the trading session. But that story is also out there, that you threaten tariffs and you get, quote unquote, the desired result. What would you say?
Well, we represent America's largest domestic manufacturing sector by employment, so CPG industry. That's food, beverage, household, and personal care products, the folks that make the everyday essentials that you and I use every day. One of our concerns is that if the tariffs aren't implemented strategically to really understand what can or cannot be made here, we are sourcing from domestic agriculture sources. We're making things here in America, but inherently, you still need connectivity to the rest of the world. You still need an agricultural input that can only be grown in another country. And when that happens and tariffs go into effect, it's inevitable that costs have to go somewhere, and they will rise for consumers that are already concerned about inflation. They elected President Trump on an economic mandate to really restore some normalcy in the marketplace. And we're concerned about what the impact of those tariffs might have on U.S. manufacturers that we represent.
And the agricultural tariffs, it looks like, as well as other, quote unquote, reciprocal tariffs, to use the president's term, supposed to go into effect on the 2nd of April. With these others, I'll bring it up from the tablet. We can put it up on the screen, going into effect tomorrow. So these numbers that we're going to see tomorrow, Canada, Mexico, 25% supposedly. And this was interesting, what he said about China here, 20%. Let me see if you agree with this about, from the Tax Foundation. They say this is, with all of this, probably an $800 increase in taxes, effectively, a tariff being a tax, a more than 2% drop in after-tax income for Americans. Does that sound about right to you?
I think what's very clear is if you look at across the whole landscape of tariffs and what the impact will be. President Trump, smart negotiator. His team, the best of the best. And when you look across how they can really unpack this in a way that protects consumers, there's a way to impose tariffs and to look at what's underway and how to negotiate the best deal possible for America in a way that still protects consumers.
How would that
and
be?
Really
like similar to what he did in his first term,
manufacturers.
a little bit, where we didn't see the worst of the worst?
I think it's all about I think it's all about creating leverage, and there's a way to really, I think, you could hurt them and take action where it's going to hurt on other countries and drive some of those tough negotiating stances while still being sensitive to the real needs of U.S. manufacturers here at home, the agricultural inputs and the ingredients that they can only source from other places in the world, whether it's oats in Canada, whether it's avocados from Mexico, whether it's spices from around the world. There's a way to account for this that then really protects the voting public that elected Trump to address inflation.
We import a lot of avocados from Mexico, that's for sure. Now, we got a guy by the name of Bill Walsh on, investor last hour, who had this to say. Let's listen.
The expense it's going to have in the auto market for sure is going to be a killer for the U.S. So I'm believing they get to a deal. I think that so much of this is buy the rumor, sell the fact, right? That we know that this is going to be an expensive game to play, but it's also, I think, in some parts, if they're going to charge us to bring our products there, we've got to have something to bring it back.
So we do see some of that coming back already. I mentioned Honda as one example, and maybe there'll be, or have been others, and maybe there'll be others in the future. So then I think the question is, when you see more of that, is does Trump back off a little bit, right? That was the rumor over the weekend that maybe he wouldn't go all in 25%. Now it looks like he might. So he might play around with this a little bit, and if you see more stories like that, maybe he backs off. I don't know.
Well, again, they're playing at a different level when it comes to negotiating. But I think what's our concern is, again, if you're already making things here in America, you're doing everything right, you're paying your workers more and more in the past 3 years, you're just trying to maintain the very slim margins that you already have, and you're trying to keep costs low for the consumer that's relying on these products. You have to have a way of working hand in hand with the administration and really trying to flesh out how to best go about this America First trade policy and keep everyone rowing in the same direction.
Growing threat of tariffs against Canada, one state caught in the middle. We're talking about Michigan. Canada is that state's largest trading partner. The Great Lakes state imports roughly $50 billion in goods from Canada, with automobiles and motor vehicle parts being the top imports. Here with us now is Republican Congressman from Michigan, Tim Wahlberg. Congressman, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Anna, good morning. Good to be with you.
Great to have you, sir. So Trump is planning to add tariffs on foreign cars. They begin in April. He did not specify how much the tariffs would be, which countries would be subjected to them. But I want to hear your thoughts on these tariffs and, of course, how it will impact Americans, specifically in your state.
Well, it's a great question that we have to consider. However, we also know that this president was elected in the last election by 77 million people who believe that he would be a disruptor of status quo in the United States and around the world. We know that he is a negotiator supreme, and that a lot of what he does is to get things moving in a disrupted way, but ultimately bring it to a solution that is a benefit first and foremost to the United States, and that includes Michigan. And so when we look at the tariffs, especially thinking of our friend and neighbor to the north, in my case, to the south as well, because Canada is south of Michigan.
Sure.
It gives us an opportunity to discuss the things that speak to equality of trade, and specifically fair trade. So I think ultimately what he's saying is we are not going to accept higher tariffs from you than what we are giving to you. And if that works out, in the end, we all benefit.
So you don't seem too concerned, at least at this point. We know Trump ran on fixing the economy. Now he's saying prices may be impacted by tariffs. Here's what he said, Congressman. Let me talk to you on the other side.
I think what's going to go up is jobs are going to go up, and prices could go up somewhat short term, but prices will also go down.
So Americans should prepare for some short-term pain.
No, you said that. I didn't say that.
What if the prices go up?
Let's see what happens. Nobody really knows what is going to happen.
Nobody really knows. But, Congressman, what do Americans face between waiting for more products to be made here in the United States or paying more for products from other countries?
And I think that's the key. We want it made here in the United States. We certainly want to be a global partner, but first and foremost, it has to happen in the United States. And so this is a real push to do just that. Now, I mean, you think back historically, World War I, World War II, we had people making sacrifices for the benefit of freedom and opportunity and victory. And so, we had war bonds, we had rationing of fuel and things like that. People went in my district there, went from the farm and worked in plants that built bombs, et cetera. Life changed, but in the end, it worked out for us and we were better off. And I think that's what Trump is saying. Yes, indeed, there may be some increased prices for the short term until the rest of the world understands that America will not be a nation that lets them walk over us. You know, hearing from Modi the other day as he met with the president or the prime minister of India, the president pointed out that we're allowing them to put a 70% tariff on our cars, so we can't sell cars in India. That's got to change. So, you know, when the president says we're going to equal it, we'll have 70%, that should help us in the end see countries wake up, realize that we're compassionate, we're a giving country, we bless the world, but we're not going to take it lying down anymore.